But the chorus of that song, hold me close, let your love surround me, bring me near and draw me to your side. As I wait, I'll rise up like an eagle. I think for me that sums up now a part of my journey with God, that I needed a lot of love wrapping around, and have been lifted up through my relationship with Him. I was born in London, and we weren't there for very long. I had an elder brother, and then work took us down to, well, my dad, I wasn't working at 2, but took us down to Hampshire, near Winchester, where I grew up as my formative years, if you like. Anyway, things were probably fine, not that I remember much, but about the age of 4, my mum decided to follow her ambition rather than the life that she'd already chosen anyway. And she found somebody else that was flying higher in her eyes. So she left the family situation, and she took the 2 boys with her and moved up from near Winchester to nearer Manchester. Anyway, and so that was, people say, oh, you were too young to realise, but as things turned out, I wasn't. And over, I think it was just a few weeks, I developed a very bad speech impediment and couldn't talk properly, in a sentence. And life was just miserable. So my mother just couldn't manage. And it's funny looking back now, the way I thought things were then, it wasn't quite how everybody else saw them. But anyway, from my point of view, so I was unhappy. So she took me to my grandparents' house in Cambridge, which is kind of halfway down the country. And my granny ran a children's nursery there. So I had a week or so there, and she phoned my dad, and he came and got me. Now, sorry if I flip about a bit, but only about 10 years ago, my dad went to one of these business meetings, and they said, "Oh, tell us what was the best day of your life." And he could have been married or whatever. But he said to all these people, and I wasn't there, he said, the best day of my life was when my mother phoned up and said, "Jason's here, will you come and get him?" And I didn't realise, that was going on there. So I was kind of chipped around a little bit, and, my dad was working full time, so he had to try and sort of cover for me. And we lived the life of Riley, really. So Dad loved mending motor cars, and that's all. We had 3 or 4 wrecks in the garden where he would cannibalise bits to make other ones. And, we stripped engines on the dining table and could leave it there, and it was fantastic. Wash parts in the bath and all that kind of stuff. I had quite a big garden. So although in my middle years, I looked back at my childhood and thought it was pants, terrible. When I think about it now, I think, well, it was sort of boy's own adventure, really. We melted down lead pipes to make fishing weights, and it was just all very exciting. But I didn't have my mum wasn't there. In due course of time, my dad met somebody else, and they got married, and started, a family between them as well. And I was a troubled child, really. I felt that my mum, rejected me from my point of view, and it was difficult to accept somebody else coming along. She didn't, want to take the place of my mother, but she found it very difficult. And then my brother came along, and anyway, we got on all right. But she was a Christian herself, and we weren't at all. We just had no interest in that side of things. And she started going along to the local Anglican church. So I was probably sort of 8. This is between 8 and 13. And we used to go along to, evensong and things. And such is the structure of the church. But Dad became a church warden or whatever. And I joined the choir because I've always enjoyed singing. And I even got to be a head chorister at one point in my robes, and had a medal, and that we had a ruff. And you couldn't see our feet. Dad used to think we came in on casters because we sort of glided in. So we joined we're part of the Anglican church there. And my parents, because I'd accepted my mum as my mum, not my mother, so by this time. And they took on running the bookstore because, all volunteers had stepped back apart from them. And so we ended up with boxes of books in our loft, which you could go and sit in, of, stock waiting to go out. And I, as sort of 8 or 9-year-old, an avid reader, I started reading through all these, and there were names like Doreen Irving, I don't know if you know her, from Witchcraft to Christ, sort of crossing the switchblade type of thing. And I was reading all these books and thinking, wow, these are Christians. Obviously, that's the whole point of the book. And they've been really bad, and now they're really good. And then looking at myself and thinking, well, I haven't been really bad. How can I qualify to be a Christian, really? It's I was reading these books, and they're all fantastic, and somebody went out to Africa and India doing great things. The Lord, and I was thinking, well, here I am. Should I go and be bad for a bit or something? In my mind as a child. But now, looking back on my life, I could write a book, I think, and it would be sort of interesting. I maybe haven't been, wasn't a gangster or anything, but I was in the grip of Satan as much as the next man, really. And I got to my teens. Still, we went to church. It was lovely. I could sing and stuff, but I didn't have any sort of commitment to God. I didn't realise that there needed to be. It was all very, the vicar was kind of representing God, and we were all the congregation, and there was very much we came to worship from afar. But I got to my teens, and things started going on, and suffered a great deal from very dark depression through those times, particularly 13 to 18. And at times I wanted to, if I'd had the guts, sort of probably ended it all. But, God was there, and he had his hand upon me, because I still felt that I didn't really fit, and, and things get buried deep down, so you don't really know why these things happen. But I was very depressed, and, my parents must have been saints now, looking back at how they had me to deal with. And I didn't run off or anything, but we had this big garden with a lot of trees, and I used to go and climb up to as high as I could in one of these trees, and just sit there till the sun went down, and they'd call and stuff. It was just a sort of strange existence, really. But then Mum and Dad felt they weren't getting enough from the church situation. They read the Bible, and they listened to people expounding it on, with tapes and things like that. And they went to the vicar and said, we really feel that we should be tithing because we've read in the Bible that we should, and it really does sound like a good principle. And he basically begged them not to, because it would really upset the church finances, because he'd have to put them in his book, and they would be giving more than everybody else put together. I used to, in the choir, I used to help count the collection, and there was always like pennies and 2p's and great big piles. Everybody put their small change in. So that was just one thing, but they felt that they weren't quite fitting into that situation. They wanted more than those people did. And then a chap came to paint the factory where my dad worked as an engineer. And he was from a Christian group, which was just down the road, a couple of miles. And they were having a big convention that's like a week-long thing. There were meetings morning, noon, and night. And it was all, the big shots came over from America. And it was all very powerful. So my dad went along with this chap called Doug to some of these meetings. And it was revelation, so far apart from where they had been. And these people were setting up a Christian community. There was a big old Victorian red brick house there. I went to visit, in holidays, and that we went down for days, and there was like an old barn, and it was one wall was floor to ceiling with rabbit hutches. I thought, oh, that's lovely, these fluffy white rabbits. Then we went in for a meal, and you know what was on the menu? It was rabbit. So they were trying to be self-sufficient, really, and grow their own food and things. And this big house, it had been divided into flats, and basically, as the family came along, they put money into the pot, and then they would buy out somebody's flat, so that gradually the whole place became owned by the community. So after a little bit, that's what my mum and dad did, sold the house. But strangely, every time somebody brought a big load of money, you sell your house and bring it along, as in, you read it in the beginning of Acts, people sold their possessions and all lived together. So coincidentally, every time somebody did this, the people leading it would go off on a world trip. Where did they get their money? I don't know. But, it's great. And that was the message, and things were going on. And me as a lad, it was all great fun as well. So just before we moved in, I was being bullied at school very badly, and probably because I was different. And add that in with depression and things, it was very, very difficult time. And these folks were setting up a school, and my mum was a teacher. And I really got to a point, I came home with my bag was in shreds and my clothes had been all pulled, and I just, she said what was wrong, and I just sort of burst into tears, and that was really the end of the line for me at that school. So they were starting a school anyway. So the parents decided to sell up and to commit themselves to living in community, as the early church did. And one of these world trips came up very shortly afterwards, at the same time. But seeing me, these leaders and their family asked if I'd like to go on this trip with them. So I was about 13, and I left school early, the school I was at, and we flew to New York. Somebody gave us a camper van, and we spent 6 weeks driving, went to Niagara Falls and across to the Rocky Mountains, and flew in a light aircraft, and sort of preaching along the route. There were a lot of farms and things, all to do with the movement that this group were in. Anyway, the chap that was painting my dad's factory, Doug, he used to look after the animals, and I really loved working with the animals. And so he was talking to me an awful lot, and trying to help me, because I was still, depressed and in dark times a lot of the time. Anyway, he said, well, why don't you become a Christian? So well, I wasn't even sure that it worked, as it were. So I sort of got tricked in a way, because he said, well, you could pray to God. If he doesn't exist, then you've wasted a few words. It doesn't matter. But if he does, then you could change your life. So that night, or one night, it was an October half term, 30 and odd years ago, I just lay in bed and said, well, God, if you're there, as far as I'm concerned, my life's a mess, really, and I don't know where I'm going, what I'm doing. Do you want to ever go, if you like? So I said, the sinner's prayer, as we say. Just said, well, Lord, you can take over for me, and we'll see how we get on. So I was thinking, well, that's just some words that you say, really. But that next week, I felt different inside. And it was something that was coming from inside. Nobody gave me a list of things to do and not to do. But I became different. And I always say, becoming a Christian for me, I expected, the streets to be paved with gold and everything to flow smoothly, all my problems to disappear. And I found that they didn't really. I'd still get depressed and things would still turn up. But I had somebody to walk through those times with, and some support. And I love that Psalm 24, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you're with me by my side. And I began to realize that, our lives do get into messes, and God is into healing. But sometimes things do take time to work through, especially when they're deep down. There's things that I didn't know, I don't remember consciously from when I was 4, that went on. And those things get buried under sort of layers of silt and things that go on. But God's very good at picking up a thread and just untangling it. But, it's one thread at a time. So my life began to change for the better. It's still a long walk. So we're in this community, and the leaders said, love travelling, and it was a good life. I milked cows. I learnt to drive on a tractor, and it was all fantastic. Running around, and I got 7 O-levels despite my disrupted schooling and basically being taught at home within the community. But school for me was such an unenjoyable experience, I think, with the bullying and all that stuff that had gone on, that I really didn't want to go any further. And as part of the self-sufficiency side of things in the community, they started a little nursery garden, literally selling stuff at the gate on a table. And, I just loved being outside and with animals and plants. So at 16, I left school and just moved from indoors to outdoors in the same complex there. And I worked alongside a chap named Chris, who'd been trained at Edinburgh Botanics. He'd been worked at Windsor Great Park. He'd helped Princess Anne onto a horse, and that sort of stuff. But he was very passionate about plants, and just working alongside him, some of that rubbed off, really, and I began to learn the names and all that sort of thing. Circumstances happened that another couple who were in leadership came and joined the community. At the same time, or similar sort of time, the couple that were heading things up there, moved to Manchester temporarily to help a group of students that wanted to live in community, just to oversee that, sort of like a church plant, if you like, or a community plant. They didn't really want a load of students living in a house without covering and supervision. Anyway, they went and did that for a few months, and then came back, and there was a power struggle, for want of a better word, such that the the incomers won. Basically, it was a very strong personality, and these people were displaced, so they lived locally for a bit, and then one day they turned up and said, actually, on the deeds, our name, the house is in our name, even though it was done in the name of the community, and we want it back, basically, and we're going to sell it. We need the money. So there were probably 30 of us without anywhere to be. So we decided, I was probably about 18, we decided to kind of sit it out, because scripturally it wasn't scriptural to take someone to law, which we could have done. But we thought, well, we'll let them do that if they want, so we're just going to stay put. They can evict us if they like. Anyway, an agreement was made, financial one, so that a portion of the money would go to the group. And a solicitor came, because we needed to set up a new sort of trust agreement, and which this leader chap had drawn up. And the solicitor sat in this room and said, look, well, you've all got to sign this to enable this to go forward. And he said, if you sign this, he said, you're out of your minds. He said, my legal recommendation is don't sign it. But he was there to notarize it or whatever. So anyway, everybody signed it. I didn't have to, because I was underage at the time, but I did. And so we were then displaced, but with some money. So we found 3.5 acres just outside of Manchester, which interestingly was about 2 miles from my mother, who I hadn't seen for over 20 years. She would try and come and visit, and because of all that had gone on, it was just too painful. I didn't want to see her or have anything to do with it. I'd got a new mum and a new family. And it must have been hard for her, but that was the way I was feeling. She wrote a letter in the interim. She was going into hospital for an operation, and I think it was because of the risks involved in the operation. She wanted to make contact. And I wrote back a great long letter about how I felt, really, and how I felt about being hurt and all that. She never came back to me on that. Anyway, so I found myself in Manchester, and we started off from a green site, really. It was like a lorry park with an old house. It started again. And I got in touch with my mother, and she just wasn't like my mum, but we became friends, I suppose. And now, I'd see her more as my mum, I suppose. But, I've got 2 mums, so that's great. But it was quite hard. And, talking to her later, I thought I'd been dumped. And she said that's the hardest thing she'd ever done. And she said she did it for me because she saw that I was upset and wasn't going to settle down. And she said it was breaking her heart to see me just going downhill. So that was her side of things. And she said, the time she tried to see me, she just felt it was so hard. But, she made her choice. We all make our own choices. So that's the way it was. But we've become restored. Anyway, the couple leading the Manchester work, if you like, were affiliated to the big American movement, and people would come and kind of check over what we're doing. But over time, strange things were happening. So, and the American covering really stopped coming, because they were just being told where to go, really. And it became a very oppressive situation. All sorts of things. We didn't have any money to start with. That all went. It was controlled by these people, in the communal pot, as it were. I remember I had some savings in a post office, a little post office book, and I remember buying a Mars bar at the beginning of the week and cutting it into 7 slices so that it would last all week. Things like toothpaste, there was a store cupboard you could get from. You couldn't watch what you liked on the telly. It was all mostly pre-recorded and checked, and then it would be put on and that sort of stuff. We worked 7 days a week, often to from 7:30 to 9:00 at night, building up this nursery business. And then they decided to split off a landscaping division, which I sort of ran, but not financially, and it was out of the umbrella of the community agreement. So that this chap, because we didn't really get paid till the minimum wage legislation came in when we had to be. Anyway, he did very well out of the situation because there were 3 of us working full time on that. Anyway, so it was a very kind of lockdown situation, and everything was quite public. There wasn't much private space at all. But things started to change, and I think God does intervene in situations. His son, who I worked with, sort of came to an age, and the local school started a computer club. So because the son could do what he liked, really, some of us would go off down to this computer club. And there was a Christian sort of dating site, or, you could meet other Christians anyway, because we just didn't meet anybody. So I got on this, and it really wasn't me at all. So I ended up, and, it was friendship site, but basically girls were looking for fellas and the other way around. So, it was quite fun chatting to folks, and I met 1 or 2 girls at the Trafford Centre that was near us, and it was, it was all a big scary world, really, because it was quite a male-orientated the community. There weren't many girls; there were wives. Single people were definitely discouraged from any kind of working towards any kind of relationship, because all the married people said, "Oh, it's terrible. We're married already, but you shouldn't be, because Paul says you shouldn't." So that was the way that was. But anyway, I was kind of emailing some of these, and then this girl sent me a great long email from County Durham, and then I replied, and I thought, well, there's lots of this chit chat, so I thought, well, she's told me a lot about herself, so she can have the whole 9 yards. So I wrote this great long email about my life, where it had been. I thought, well, she might as well know warts and all. Then, she could walk away now. It would save everybody a lot of time. But she didn't really. So I gave her my mobile number and said, send me a text. I was in the middle of working in someone's garden. The phone goes, and it says, "Hi, it's Debbie. I just wanted to hear your voice." And then she rang off. So it's like, well, what's all that about? And then the nursery garden that we were working on there, there's a plant. We specialises in rare and unusual plants. And there was one plant that we wanted to stock and have, and it's a big white daisy, but it only grows in one place in the country. And as it happens, that was about 2 miles from where Debbie lived. So I kind of spoke to her first in October, and then December, they said, well, someone needs to go and get a van load of these plants. You can't get them anywhere else in the country. So I said, well, would it be right if I went? And, my boss, if you like, for all his control, he said, yeah, and I told him about Debbie, and he said, just have the day, and I was like, way, So I went up early in the morning, and we got these plants, and then I met Debbie, and it was freezing cold, and there's a waterfall over there called High Force, and she said, I'll take you and see some of the sights, give us something to do. So we went down to this waterfall, and it was just thundering away, and it was lovely. And then we started walking back up, and I don't know, I just took her hand. We'd been emailing a lot, and then the snow started coming through all these bare trees, and it was extremely romantic. And at the end of that day, we just felt like we had been married for years, just so comfortable and together. And then she wanted to do up their garden there because when she left, or if she left, she wanted it to be nice for her mum and her sister. So obviously, she said, would I give her a quote? So I did, and my boss typed it all up. And it was, a few £1,000 because it was a week's work and lots of stuff. And then my boss, uncharacteristically again, said, well, why are we doing this? Take a week off, have a holiday and do this garden. So, all right then. So I went up, stayed in my mum's house, and did the garden. And then shortly after that, we wanted to move things forward a bit. Now, there was a rule in the community or the movement that you had to walk out a year, it was called, and you had to be 18 inches apart, a minimum. That was the closest you could get for this year. And then after that year, if you still liked each other, then you might be able to get married. So I didn't want to rebel or rock the boat, so I kind of applied to walk out a year with Debbie, and I was so scared. She came with me, and she held on, and she said, "You were just shaking like a leaf," and everything was really hard. You had to go and ask permission for everything. Anyway, there was this year's interim, and during that year, she got to the point of saying, she came to visit every fortnight, and I went back the opposite fortnight. And she just said, there's no way that I can live in that situation. She'd come down, and Saturdays I used to go delivering stuff for the garden centre, flags and things. So she would like to come with me. And then I was out doing this one of these Saturdays, and the phone goes, and it was this chap. And he said, we need Debbie back because there's a big pile of ironing. So, she'd come to see me. And she ended up back working because he didn't think we should be together. Anyway, all kinds of things like that. And she just said, look, there's no way. I just don't think I can do it. It's a big commitment. And from where I was and the sort of grip on things, I just thought, well, I don't think I can leave because it's all encompassing. It's, my family were there. My work was there, my church was there, everything. And, it sounds terrible that all your meals are at set time and things, but I know what prisoners feel like when they come to be released. They don't want to because everything's regulated for you, and you don't have to think, really. Anyway, so we got to this impasse where she didn't want to come there and I couldn't go there. And then, the Lord moves in strange ways. A chap that worked with my dad, his wife, got a job at the Haverick prison. No, I'd never heard of Milham at all. And he said, they're moving to this place called Milham. It's really lovely. It's by the sea. Houses are cheap, and I think at the time that was in the paper, it was the cheapest place to buy a house in the country at one time. So, right, okay, that's interesting information. Anyway, but Debbie phoned one time and said, look, I've had a think, and she said, I really think we should, getting married is what we're got to do. So even if it means coming and living there, I want to be with you, which was lovely. And then the same conversation, I said, have you ever heard of a place called Milham? And she had to come to that place of saying, okay, I surrender all. And then God opened the door for us to move somewhere else and to break out. So I broke the news that I was going to go and get married, and you could have heard a penny drop. And it was, there were whispered congratulations and all this sort of thing. And I just thought, well, I've got to make a break for the fence, basically, and I get shot on the way. That's the way it is. So I met up with Debbie for some time in the summer holiday, and we came to explore, where is this place, Milham? And we drove over from County Durham, where her mum lived. We came to Barrow, and I just felt the Lord say that where we were going to be needed a hospital and a builder's merchants. I think that was it. No, I don't think no, that wasn't really on the... Anyway, hospital and a builder's merchant were the two things. So we went to Barrow. There's massive great hospital. There's builders merchants from wall to wall. Obviously work there. The houses were quite cheap. And it was sunny. It was lovely. You think, oh, well, surely this is the right place. God's pointed us in the general direction of South Cumbria. And we drove round to get to here, by which time it had clouded over. It was blowing a gale, and with all the dark stone houses, it just felt quite oppressive, really. We went on Haverick Beach, and we literally did the Titanic thing. We leant at 45 degrees and didn't fall over. So I needed a job in order to make the move. So we just left that before the Lord. Debbie works in the job centre, and she said, look, you don't get a job just like that. I'd never applied for a job in my life. So I kept my eye on the internet, and this job came up at Brockwood's Hall up there it was for a grounds manager. So I said to Debbie, oh, this is there. Well, so I applied for that, and then they wrote back and said, well, sorry, that post is gone, but the next level up we think might be for you. So that was maintenance manager. So I went up and had this interview, which was bizarre, sitting on the sofa just chatting. And at the end of it, they said, well, we'll leave it with you. Can you let us know in a week? And so I told this to Debbie, because I didn't know. And she said, oh, no, usually they say, we'll let you know. But they wanted me anyway. So, and there was a staff cabin for me to live in. So that was two of the three things, work, somewhere to live, that I needed fulfilling. The third one was the church. To cut a long story short, we came down to the Bridge Cafe with its lovely formica tables, and we sat in a corner. And in another corner, there was this couple testifying to another chap about all the things the Lord has done for them. They'd gone here and He'd provided this, and I just looked at Debbie and I said, look, this is it. So I went over and said, look, we think the Lord's telling us to come here. So I'd got those three things fulfilled for me. And this was the church that they were coming to. So that was wonderful. Anyway, so in the community, because of fear of competition probably, anybody that had a gift was really kept under wraps, really, because the leaders were leading. And there were lots of opportunities. I did learn a lot, and that's the only way to look back on your life, is that I learned a lot out of it. And since I've broken away and come here, my depression it's hardly a problem. A little bit in January when the days are dark, but I was working at Brockwood, and then we got our house. We got that in a miraculously short time. It completed a week before we got married. Debbie was still living, obviously, over in County Durham. I got a job as head gardener at Muncaster Castle through a lady from church that used to clean for the people that owned its daughter. It was complicated. And they'd been looking all over, and they interviewed several people. I hadn't been to college, hadn't got a degree, which you should have. Anyway, I'd spent 6.5 years there. I've been on the telly. I had a regular spot on the radio. Been in Cumbria Life and Lancashire Life. Cumbria Life, and there's another one similar. Lake District Life, that's right. None of those things I've ever pursued, but they just seem to come. I've been blessed in this church to worship, lead the worship, be part of the leadership team. And there's a scripture in Joel here which says, I will repay you for the years the locusts have eaten, the great locusts and the young locusts, the other locusts and those that swarm. You will have plenty to eat until you are full, and you will praise the name of the Lord your God, who's worked wonders for you. And that really is my life, and I feel that I've come from the bottom, maybe not to the top, but I've been so blessed, and in just a short time, I've got a wife and a child. We've got a happy family. I work for myself, and life is good. But I did have to work through all those things to get there. And as John said, it's made me who I am today. Amen.
Nobody said that if you come to Jesus that life would be perfect. Sometimes things happen, and we heard how Jason ended up getting involved in a community that basically started to control his family, control his life, and they weren't allowed to spend money and having 2 or 3 Mars bars a week. He had to slice it up into 7 bits, and so not everything that seems good is good, and we have to be very careful. And when God's leading us and directing us in situations, because sometimes there are people who will take advantage of you, and they can come across so nice and so good. So always remember, take hold of God's word, see what God's word says about the situation and the circumstances. But thank God that God took Jason out of it and he placed him in beautiful Millam. Wow, he's placed in this place and he's been such a blessing to us. And it's been such a journey for him.